Hi, everyone. Welcome to our post-election debrief. It's noon Central Time, high noon Central Time. Every time I say that, I think of Clint Eastwood and the Wild Wild West. And I don't know if that's just because I'm Texan now or it feels good for some. There's no showdown happening, by the way. We're not doing any sort of show. We've had enough of that. We're gonna try to turn the page. That's what we're gonna try to do. And we're gonna do a debrief over the last several hours of news that we've experienced together. As I get started here, let me bring in some of our friends who are on a different platform as we're broadcasting live on YouTube, on X, on Instagram. It's really amazing technology. Think about the technology changes that we've seen even since the last election cycle. And thinking through that and how that has impacted not only media distribution, but potentially voters is something that I think is a huge story that we have a lot to unpack. We have a lot to unpack there. One of the questions we asked even going into this election day was the impact of traditional versus quote unquote non-traditional media. But can we even say that anymore? What is the media now? Who gets the throne? Who gets the spotlight as the media for America? Is it the broadcast networks or is it the podcast networks? And are we just in a completely different space? Just tying it back to some of the recent news, one of the questions going into election day related to the media was about Joe Rogan and the impact of Joe Rogan. He has a podcast that has an audience that is so much bigger than any of the broadcast news channels' nightly news shows. Doesn't even come close. So when he invites presidential candidates on his program, what is the impact of that? Now, right before the election, he endorsed former President Trump, who we will now refer to as President-elect, and we'll get to some of that because I think it's worth talking a little bit about that terminology. We know that Joe Rogan invited Vice President Harris, according to his account. Harris's team wanted him to travel and to condense the podcast. That's not his format. That's not his style. That's not what he does. And so they weren't able to come together for an agreement. I wonder if that changes. I wonder if this whole approach to how to reach the public changes. And that's what, if I, again, zoom way out, as we like to zoom in and zoom out, and we're going to do a lot of that today. That's really the big question here. What are the changes we're seeing in front of us? What is the evolution that we're seeing in front of us of the American political process and the story of America, how it's developing? It seems that we're witnessing something different and everyone's going to try to put their finger on it today. Like, what is that one thing? What happened last night? You already hear all the people talk. What does it all mean? That's what we're getting a lot of. What does it all mean? Listen, that's really a matter of opinion. And I like thinking of what we saw last night and what we're seeing today as sort of these two different stages of a story. But let's think about it as a work of art. Last night we had a totally blank page. And as the night progressed, there were black outlines of an image. And as more of the outlines came, as more information came, you got more lines and an image becomes clearer that led to the conclusion that former President Trump is now president-elect. Now we're at a stage where that picture is agreed upon. It is still a media call. We know that. But the way that the math works out and the way that we're looking at the data, there is a degree of confidence that allows all the media networks, along with the candidates, to start making certain moves while we wait for this official process to play out. So now we're at the interesting stage where we have one of those great coloring kits that you always wanted as a kid. The one that you saw at other kids' birthday parties that had all the different colors, the 200 different shades of all the different colors. We have that sitting to the side. And now we're getting a lot of people that are going to try to start filling in the blank spaces. And color is going to come to the picture and we're going to get an idea what happened here. What actually transpired? There's some theories, and what I've done today is sort of summarize some of the theories that we've heard from leading analysts, pollsters, those close to the campaigns about what actually transpired last night and what actually transpired over the last several months that would lead to the victory of former President Trump. We'll see if that shakes out over the next several weeks and months, if what the conclusions are within 24 hours are actually the conclusions that stay, But this is where it gets interesting. We get a lot of different opinions, and I'm really curious, as we have such a phenomenal audience joining us live. What do you think happened last night? What do you think is the story here? And what do you actually think the media is missing? Because one of the things I did yesterday is to our Scoop Insiders. This is a group of subscribers we deliver a special report to once a week. We're always trying to figure out, how do we troubleshoot the issue with news? We don't like pop-up ads. We don't like advertisements. We don't want to become what we hate. But there's a certain way that we have to create a platform that people can support us. And there's a few different ways you can do that. Retail. We have a really cool gear shop, by the way, working on a whole new line I'm really excited about. We have that. We have a tip jar. By the way, the tip jar is available today. Many of you have amazingly asked how to buy us a cup of coffee. We really need it. So thank you for that. We have a tip jar. If you're on Instagram and you comment tip, it'll be sent to you, by the way, for a direct message, but you can see that on our website as well. Scoop is our insider. This is the subscription service. We deliver this special report once a week. It's like a special cheat sheet for people that want a little less time on social media. And from time to time, what we do for them, we do a live broadcast every Monday, sort of like we're doing now, where we talk about, hey, these are the big stories to have on your radar. Here's what we should think about. Here's a little behind the scenes of how the news is put together. And yesterday, as I was getting ready for election day or election night, I just had all these thoughts. I called them ruminations. And ruminations actually has a little bit of a negative connotation. It was meanderings and ruminations. I had a couple other words, reflections, thoughts. Just all of this was bouncing around in my head. The questions that I had going into what would actually be, what I didn't know at the time, a decisive night. And so I wrote them all down and I delivered this special essay to our Scoop subscribers. You could go to scoop.smarternews.com, by the way, if you want to take a look at that. Take a look at this essay, but take a look at some of all these kind of special offerings that we do for this group. And I had so many questions going into the election. I'd like to actually share one of them with you. Before I get to that, though, I just want to talk a little bit about the results. And one of the things I would like to just foundationally talk about in this moment is there's only been 59 presidential elections in American history. There's only been 59. Think of how many you've witnessed or been a part of in your lifetime. It's not like we've been doing this hundreds and thousands of times. I mean, certainly when it comes to different elections we have. But this is what makes this process totally unique and fascinating. We're still a very young country, and in many ways charting our way and seeing how the Constitution's evolving and how state rights are evolving. What kind of leaders do we want? What do we want from our president or our Senate or the House of Representatives? Let's pause there for a second. Well, we have the race called for former President Trump, president-elect. That's going to take me a while, by the way. I'll probably just refer to him as President Trump. I don't mean any disrespect to President Biden, but we're just going to have too many words. So let's make it easy. And I don't love referring to, this is a rule I do have on Smarter News for those of you who are new. I don't like referring to candidates or lawmakers by their last names. This came up when I was actually a news anchor on quote unquote traditional television. Do you remember when Obamacare came up? It was the new healthcare law under President Obama. And instead of saying President Obama, most of the media networks, and it didn't matter if they were leaning right or left or whatever, it would refer to the president as Obama. And at a certain point, I just felt like there's so few people that actually have been president. We should kind of keep the title. Same with the Senate, same with the vice president. Like, let's actually use their titles. It starts sounding like a baseball team, Harris and Trump and Waltz and Van. I'm like, okay, these guys, they've been in elected office, so let's use. So that's my decision. It also can get a little wordy, and when I'm talking a lot, it can be easy to trip over this. So let's just take a step back again. We know that right now we have President-elect Donald Trump. The reason why we have that is all of the major media networks have called these races based on the data available. The data comes in different ways for different states. But according to the data available, and let's go ahead and pull it up here so you can see again what these maps look like. We have a certain number of states that have been called, and that number of states actually gets us over 270. 270 is the number that you need in the Electoral College to be victorious as president. You can still see that in some of these cases, you have gray here, Arizona and Nevada and Maine and Alaska. And in some of these, we could see, here we are in Nevada, for example, we have 86% of the votes in. President Trump is leading here. So he could pick up that state, or we could see as we get more votes, maybe Vice President Harris win. I mean, we could see some different results, and these aren't final yet. That's why they're gray. But of all the other states, and here's Michigan. So interesting. So Michigan is now called by the New York Times, and I don't know if that happened in the last few minutes before I got on air with you. So that now we have Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia all broke towards President Trump, and this is how he got to 270. So now let's see if we have uh, the actual numbers, because this will give you an idea how this will continue to add up. So when you woke up this morning, you might have seen the electoral votes for President Trump at just over 270. That was just by the math that was available. Now, when we see Michigan break to President Trump, you see him at 292. So there's a chance that he could actually get more than 300 electoral votes. And he's also winning the popular vote. As we talked about last night, it is typical that the person that wins the presidency wins the electoral college, but also wins the popular vote. It doesn't always happen that way. We saw that in 2016. That's a little bit of an outlier. I think there's been like 5 or 6 elections total where that's taken place over the course in American history. This gives you an idea of how unusual it is. What stands out most to me about this map in front of you is that there were all sorts of questions about what this election could look like. And there were many different scenarios, in fact, so many that it was difficult to sort of cover them all, about what this could look like. What were the different pathways to victory for these different candidates? And how would you piece them together into a collage? Going into election night, my one hope was that there could be a decisive victory for one of these candidates, knowing how much you've been through over the last several years, and thinking about you, our audience, and thinking about what it would mean for the country if we're in a period of great uncertainty, and how that would feel, at this point in the story. And I really care about you and your families. And just thinking about that added stress after what you've been through over the last several years, I was worried about that, admittedly. I was thinking about what would that actually mean, and how would that impact some of the other stories that we're covering. So that was my one hope, I'll admit to you, going into last night, was that there would be a decisive victory. What you're seeing on your screen here, and what we're seeing based on the data that's available, is not just a decisive victory. In many ways, it could be described as an overwhelming victory at this point for President Trump. The pathways that were thought of as completely unusual and improbable in 2016 held now in 2024. 2020, we had different results. For example, Georgia broke towards President Biden. We know that happened over the difference of 11,000 votes. That's not the case now. And it's not exactly identical to what we saw, by the way, in 2016, where President Trump won Georgia with 200,000 votes. According to some easy math, and we probably need to check that, this was just over 100,000, 117,000 votes that he won the state of Georgia. So that's a big enough margin, though, that an appeal for a recount or questioning about the results is not likely to come up. We're seeing some of that in Pennsylvania as well. A state that was won by a few tens of thousands of votes now was won by more than 150,000. So these don't feel like huge numbers, but they're big enough margins to turn down the volume on challenges. In some states, by the way, it's important to know this, that a recount can happen if a candidate requests it. It doesn't have to be like there's some big scandal or something that goes on. It can actually just be requested. And one of the things we were watching for really over the last several hours, and one of the reasons why I stayed up to about 4:00 in the morning, is because I was curious what we hear from Vice President Harris. Last night, as the momentum was building, there were still quite a few states that we didn't have results. Vice President Harris's team stepped to the microphone and alerted everyone and said, she's not going to speak tonight at this event that was planned. Now, paralleling this, we heard that former President Trump, President-elect Trump, was going to speak in Florida at his event. And so as you see, these are sort of indications of how the campaigns are feeling. But as a journalist, I want the data. I want the actual facts to share with you unequivocally what's going on. And with several states still out, and there's still a question, it was Wisconsin and Michigan, for example, I don't know what these campaigns are seeing. And a lot of the campaigns actually have better polling data than some of these independent services or college affiliated pollsters. And so are they seeing something that we don't know? Is something going on that we don't know that I don't want to look past because it could be a big story for you, and then you get surprised by that story. That doesn't feel good, and this is where the media starts messing around with people and how we're feeling about election results, and I don't want any of that. So I really wanted to proceed cautiously. And that was a big question coming into this morning. Will we now, based on these results, hear from Vice President Harris? Will we hear from President Biden? Will there be a concession coming? Because that is also part of a tradition that takes place in America where we have one candidate congratulate or concede to the other. Again, knowing that these are still projected unofficial results, but the data is such that there's an agreement here about what has happened. From the latest information we have, and this has changed, the time has changed, we should hear from Vice President Harris around 4:00 Eastern time. And the way the reporting is being done is not official, an official statement from her campaign yet. But the reporting, according to sources close to her, is that this is going to be a concession speech. In the way that this sort of works itself out and the way that sequence of events normally happens, we would know that Vice President Harris has called President Trump and had a brief conversation. That's part of the way the process has gone. By the way, in 2020, we didn't have this sort of neat sequence of events. As you know, there was all sorts of disruption and questions. And I don't want to go too far back there, but I want to just typically explain to you typically sort of how this takes place. Once the media hears that this concession speech, a concession, it makes me think of concessions at a football game. Anybody else thinking about pretzels or okay? Anyways, once we hear that a candidate has conceded, and that may be released as well by the other campaigns. You're kind of working through all these different sources close to the candidates out of respect that we want to have each candidate have their moment to address the American public. Once that phone call is made, that's usually talked about and a sign of momentum towards this concession speech that we expect, and we expect that at 4:00 Eastern time. Once that happens, that's going to be a big moment. And it is a turning of the page. So one of the things I've noticed is for the Democrats, and let me check this while I'm talking to you. We can actually do this live together. So why not? Technology allows us. I'm just going to look up Barack Obama right now. No, we don't have any additional tweets from him for the last 16 hours from Michelle Obama. Let's see. Nope, about 18 hours. She retweeted Selena Gomez. Let's look up Hillary Clinton. Why am I doing this? The Democrats in particular are very good about staying in step with each other. They were very organized, and I don't see a scenario where one of them would step out of line. They're waiting for Vice President Harris to say something before they say something. If they end up doing that, we have nothing from Hillary Clinton. Let's see, Bill Clinton, just for what it's worth, and President Biden. Let's just take a look at what's going on here. That's what is amazing about X is that this is a cute picture. I'm going to show this to you. This is a picture. We can have a moment of just kind of hanging out, can't we, just for a second? This is on X from Hillary Clinton, retweeted by Bill Clinton, of them voting in 1982. It's a cute picture. So you can see everyone's sort of waiting. One of my favorite podcasts, Pod Save America. These are former Obama officials that built a podcast network, very successful, by the way. I was waiting. Are they going to release a podcast this morning? Haven't done so yet. So there's a waiting until Vice President Harris speaks. Then we may or may not hear from other Democrats. And this is what it's going to take sort of to get to the other side. Once that happens from Vice President Harris, the transition sort of takes off. As of right now, one of the most interesting things about this election is, despite concerns about fraud and inconsistency and interference. Remember, I had that call with the Department of Homeland Security. So far, that's not a story that has surfaced. Doesn't mean that we're not going to see it. It's not a story that has surfaced so far. So some of the big storylines that we had going into this election, that they've kind of dropped off, at least for now. Doesn't mean they're not going to come back up, but at least for now. So this is what we're really watching regarding the presidency, the race for the White House. I'm going to return to that in just a moment. Let me just briefly just touch on the Senate as well as touching on the House of Representatives. So the Senate, if you remember, a third of the Senate was up for election. So that was enough because the Senate was so evenly divided to raise questions about, well, is the Senate going to be a majority Republican or Democrat? And based on the results we have right now, the Senate will be in a Republican majority. For the House of Representatives, we don't have results of any degree of confidence right now. It could either go in either way. We know also the House of Representatives was very evenly divided or balanced, as we'd like to say. We could use that term. And so because of the way that House races are set up, because they're in smaller areas and the margin of victory can be extremely tight. It could be a couple hundred votes. It could be a few dozen votes, depending on the district. Oftentimes it can take longer to work through those results. So you think of like the big, high stakes, big headlines about the presidency, and that could take a long time of counting. But when you're talking about the margins are bigger. So when it gets past a certain margin, then there's not that many other votes out there. And it becomes easier to say, okay, even if we went back and checked a few thousand of these votes, it doesn't matter. There's enough for a declaration essentially of a winner by these media outlets. And we know more or less of how the state is going to bend. But when it's really in these districts where it could be so close and different states have different ways of working through this, it can just take some time. So we don't know the House of Representatives. I just want to caution everybody on this. In the past, we have seen, whether it was during the Obama administration, even during the Trump administration, expectation that when a party has the House and the Senate, then the president is basically cleared hot. Whatever the president wants is going to float through Congress. We're just going to wind it up and let it go. And that has not been the case historically. Much to the chagrin of these political parties, it's actually harder to pass legislation than just getting the majority in both of these bodies, if that is the case. And even when that is the case, whether it's immigration reform or other big topics, it has proven difficult to pass anything through Congress. And that's part of the process of Congress. You need more than just a slim majority to move legislation along. So just keep that in mind. If you hear that the House does bend to the Republicans and turns that way, and you might have a majority in the House and the Senate with a Republican president, you'll get a lot of people saying, oh, it's it. There's no guardrails. It's off to the races. That hasn't proven to be the case for either party. It's really difficult to legislate. It's a funny fact that we forget on a regular basis. So let me see some of your comments here to just see what do you think? What do you think of what happened last night? Let's share some of your thoughts. I'd love to talk a little bit about where you're from too, where you're coming to us from. We have such an amazing community here and so many different people coming from all over the country. I'm seeing you live here from all over the place. One of the things I just love about this community is that you have proven that you can create a community where there are all sorts of different people, regions, religions, races, politics, and you all come together because you actually believe in nonpartisan news and you just sort of want the news. And you want to be at a place where you don't feel like you're being yelled at or lectured. And guess what? Neither do I. So this is great. I really appreciate you. We can be here together. So I'm very curious, where are you from? Go ahead and put that up on the board. Remind people of where you are from, where you're coming from. Because really the view from our front porch, by the way, I never had a porch until I moved to Texas. Never actually lived in a house, a freestanding house, until I was 37 years old. Always lived in a flat or an apartment. And so when people say the porch, I'm like, wow, the porch, so amazing. What we see from our front door, for so many years, it was another apartment door for me, or it was the city skyline in New York City, or it was the ocean in San Francisco. Now in Texas, there's a big oak tree. Like, put what you see outside your front window. Put down on there. Don't just say where you're from. Say what you see, because that also gives us an idea of like how big the country is. And we literally see something different every single day. And yet our stories are intertwined. It's very amazing. And I think there's a great time for appreciation on that. I love this. So Lola's in Illinois. Sarah is in Atlanta, Georgia. Ooh, Sarah, I'm curious what the process was like for you there, because that's a real hot area for Georgia votes. Martha's in Maryland, Peggy, Illinois, Therese, Florida. Great to see you, Therese. Mobile. Do I say that wrong? Is it Mobile? I need more of an accent. for Alabama, right? You can tell me. It's good. I need that. I don't have, I don't know. Dayton, Ohio, Virginia, Vancouver, Washington. Awesome. Kathy in Texas, Sarah in Paso Robles, California. Great to see you back, Sarah. Thank you for coming back to us. I appreciate that. New Hampshire. So all sorts of places, Nebraska. Oh, Lisa in Austin, Texas. We're neighbors. Great to see you, Lisa. Kansas. So all over the place. Just amazing. Amazing community we're building. And thanks for being here for this whole process. So again, 59 presidential elections. Here's where we stand today. We're really watching for that speech from Vice President Harris. We're curious about the tone, what she says. Is there anything to be revealed that we don't know yet? There's a little part of me that's holding something back, wondering if there's anything unexpected. I don't know if that's trauma or that's good journalism, but that's what I'm feeling today is like, is there something that we don't know? So this is going to be the next sort of step that we're going to get through. I'm curious to hear what you think, what took place. I'd like to play a few different sound bites for you. I'd like to play a little bit from President-elect Trump's speech last night. It lasted a while, but there was a few key points that speaks to everybody in the country that I'd like to share with you. I'd also like to share some of the commentary, not a ton, because I'd rather hear from you than hear from what people on television or on the radio are saying. But I thought some of this commentary was actually very interesting and thought-provoking, and I'd be curious what you had to say about it. Here's how I kind of categorize this. Why did the results turn out this way? What happened here? The poll data didn't show this. The poll data did not show this. Are the polls just all wrong, or were there so many undecided? And that is the big question I have for you. Many of the people that we surveyed at Smarter News, you're very independent thinking. You may be associated with a political party, but you're not completely aligned with them. You're free thinking about what you want to do with your life. And many of you were undecided going into this election week. I'm so curious if you were undecided, if you don't feel comfortable sharing publicly, I totally understand. If you'd like to DM me as part of my reporting, I'd love that as well. If you were undecided, did you break for someone? Meaning, did you decide to vote for someone the last minute, or did you not vote? Either way, that would be an interesting factor to consider. I don't think a lot of the folks on television right now are considering that. The amount of undecideds in our group was high. And you were kind of leaning, but you weren't unconvinced. And I know you don't like that term double haters because it's too negative, which I appreciate about you. You don't like that. Like, it's not double hater. We don't hate former President Trump. We don't hate Vice President Harris. We just would like another option, please. So I'm wondering what happened to that vote. So here's some of the categories that are coming up as I'm looking at the themes from people saying, this is what happened in this election. This is why we got this result. One of them is recession. We don't have a technical recession right now. In fact, there was all sorts of, examinations of are we going to be in a recession? That's something we've talked a lot about over the last several years. There's a technical definition for a recession, which is that you have, and this is loosely used, of 2 consecutive quarters, so 2 3-month periods of negative growth. We haven't seen that in the economy, but how people have felt about this economy has changed from the data. And I think this is really important to point out. If it's all really about the economy and none of this other stuff that we're going to talk about matters, what we have seen and what I've seen in my own reporting in recent years, and this is true if I look back on different periods around the financial crisis, but it's very true in the last several years, where how people feel about the economy in a survey definitely diverts from what the data is showing. So the data will show, okay, the economy is not gangbusters, but it's not terrible. But then you ask people about it, they don't feel good about it. And even though there's not a technical recession, people haven't felt great about the economy when you look at, surveys about sentiment, even just talking to you in our reporting. There's still a feeling of prices are really high. They're high in the grocery store. I'm not sure what's going to fix this. Both candidates promised to do something about that. Vice President Harris talked about going after price gouging as one of the ways that she was going to try to solve it. President Trump has talked about bringing back oil and gas production, tariffs. He's had a couple different ideas for how to deal with the economy. Neither of these particular ideas would necessarily immediately affect inflation, singularly, linearly, is that a word? And just by one, swoop of a pen by the president. But there were different ideas on how to deal with it. So depending on what we learn, is it just the economy? Is it just the economy that was the main difference? That's the question I have for you. The second vote that I am looking at, or the category, the way the analysis is going, is a quote unquote revenge vote. a revenge vote. And that revenge vote is best explained by Scott Jennings, who used that term on CNN. Scott worked for former President Bush. He's a consistent voice on CNN to talk about Republican issues. I, wouldn't put him in the camp as a never Trumper or a Trump supporter, but he has something interesting to say last night. I thought you would enjoy hearing from him. So let's go ahead and pull up this sound.
I'm interpreting the results tonight as the revenge of just the regular old working class American, the anonymous American who has been crushed, insulted, condescended to. They're not garbage. They're not Nazis. They're just regular people who get up and go to work every day and are trying to make a better life for their kids, and they feel like they have been told to just shut up when they have complained about the things that are hurting them in their own lives. I also feel like this election, as we sit here and pour over this tonight, is something of an indictment of the political information complex. I mean, we've been sitting around here for the last couple of weeks, and the story that was portrayed was not true. I mean, we were told Puerto Rico was going to change the election. Liz Cheney, Nikki Haley voters, women lying to their husbands. Before that, it was Tim Walz and the camo hats. Night after night after night, we were told all these things and gimmicks were going to somehow push Harris over the line, and we were just ignoring the fundamentals. Inflation, people feeling like that they were barely able to tread water at best. That was the fundamentals of the election. And so I think that both parties should always look at the results of an election and figure out what went right and what went wrong. But I think for all of us who cover elections and talk about elections and do this on a day-to-day basis, we have to figure out how to understand, talk to, and listen to the half of the country that rose up tonight and said, we've had enough.
What are your thoughts on that? Does that sum it up? What are your thoughts on that being classified as a revenge voter? So it's really something that's deeper. It's not just about what the story seems to be from a media perspective. There's something deeper happening for this sort of voter, as it's being described, of rising up against what feels like a political class that's not paying attention. And although former President Trump, President-elect Trump now, has well-documented flaws that in some cases he might even agree with, he's been consistent in that people know who he is, and he's not an insider. He's not an insider of the political process, and we know that because he's had plenty of Republicans come out and speak out against him. What about that term revenge voter? I'm curious what you think about it. Here's my next term: retribution. Revenge feels, particularly aggressive, but retribution is something that's a little bit quieter. And retribution can mean vengeance as well, but retribution can mean payback. And this is something I pulled from your surveys, because those of you who said that you were Democrat voting for a Republican for the very first time, there were a couple key issues that really stood out to you. One was the Make America Healthy Again movement. You really felt the team that former President Trump, President-elect Trump, had around him was a significant part of your vote. You wanted to hear more about that. And there was this emotion that came through. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It's almost difficult for me to articulate, because I think when asked point blank, do you trust the government? I think some of these voters would say, yeah, but, and it's that, yeah, but it's these last couple years have been really difficult. And we now have some questions about all sorts of things, whether it's about the artificial dyes in the food, and being told, oh, it's fine. It's a negligible level, Wait a minute. We've had questions about that for years. Why hasn't anyone listened to us about that? Everyone should wear a mask and everyone should get vaccinated. And maybe that's what you ended up doing. But then a couple of years later, you think, well, I have a few questions about that. I don't think I can even ask them, because if I ask them, then I'm going to be an anti-vaxxer and I'm going to be and I can't even ask that question. And now I'm sitting and feeling like I can't ask any questions, and that doesn't feel good. And I don't like that. This is the voter I'm seeing in this kind of retribution of like, I'm not saying that these voters are going to stay Republican, but in this particular moment, there was something they saw in the offering from President-elect Trump that they thought, I don't want to stay exactly on this path, and I'd like another option. And although I have questions about this option as well, I feel in some cases that maybe I won't use the term lied to, but I feel like I've had to bite my tongue so much that I can't even explore some of these different questions I have for my own family. And I want to be able to do that. So that kind of sits in like a little different category to me than the revenge voter. It's retribution. It's coming to call on this and say, I want to try that. I like a little bit more of that, and I want a little bit more freedom to explore this. And maybe I never do it ever again. It's not a voter that's changed forever. It's a voter that is curious and wants to feel okay about being curious again. That's what I got from you. And then the last category I would say for this sort of analysis about what happened is a recalibration. You're likely hearing a lot about this. So we have recession, revenge, retribution, and recalibration. These are the categories I'm looking at. And recalibration, I'm calling, is a recalibration of the boxes that we're putting voters in. So there's all sorts of questions now coming up today. You're seeing a lot of them. For example, about the Black male voter, the Black female voter, the urban voter versus the suburban voter, the white female suburban voter, the elderly white woman voter, the Latino male voter. All these boxes that we put people in and say, okay, well, if they fit, they check these boxes, they're going to vote this way. And in all these cases, all these boxes sort of exploded and they're no longer containing the voter. And I wonder if this is really a lesson that the media is going to learn. Like, we cannot do that. How we sit and talk to people, like, it's okay for a couple weeks around election day just to stereotype the heck out of you. Do it any other time, and that's discrimination. But during election period, we're going to make sure that if you're a male Hispanic voter, we know exactly how you're going to behave. Like, how insulting, first of all. And how does anyone think that that's how it's going to work anymore? It just doesn't seem like that's how we should behave. It's just, I mean, just to be honest with you, like, is there really strong data that is suggesting that, Hispanic male voters all vote in one direction? Like, I haven't seen that data. Why do we talk about like that like it's a fact? I've never like why? Because how many generations has that? Like, that's crazy. The way that these sort of labels are talked about with such authority, like they're a fact. This is exactly what they're going to do, and then that voter doesn't do that, and it's like a shock. Is bizarre to me. It feels very outdated. I wonder if that's one of the lessons that will come away with for these political parties and pollsters and analysts. I don't know if we're going to learn that lesson, but to me, that's one of the big lessons: a recalibration of how we're even thinking about the American voter. Let me go ahead and show this to you if I can pull it up. This is from the Miami Herald. I had an article today. Here's why growing numbers of U.S. Hispanics voted for Trump and helped him win. This is an opinion piece, so just FYI on that. Let me just read this to you. One of the biggest reasons why Republican candidate Donald Trump won the November 5th elections is that Latinos voted for him in much larger numbers than anticipated, despite the former president's claims that immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country. According to exit polls, Trump increased his share of the Latino vote nationwide from 32% in the 2020 elections to 45% in 2024. Like with other ethnic groups, most of Trump's gains with Hispanic voters were among men without college education. Now think about that. What is the inference there? Hispanic, without college education. So these are, less sophisticated voters. I'm hearing a lot about that, the college educated voter versus the non-college educated voter, and how that made a big difference in the election. Again, the way that we're talking about this is totally gross, and we need to cut it out. We need to cut it out. So the college educated voter is much more sophisticated and therefore votes Democrat. And the high school educated voter doesn't really know what's best for him. That's the inference. I don't know if the author intended that, but that's the inference. And that's what's being said on airwaves all across the country right now. And I can't even understand it. Like that, again, is the way that the media is speaking about America, and also the way that political analysts are speaking about America that does not feel true or right or correct. Can we just cut it out? There is an expectation about the way that people vote based on their education, also where they live. But to be honest with you, Where did that all come from? And how did we all agree that these are these conclusions? That's what I'm curious about. And at this point, with all the different lives that we've lived and different policies that we've had to navigate and economies and situations, are you and I really looking at each other like we're so different based on our education? Is that it? Because even the events over the last year where there's been a lot of critique about what's been going on at American universities and different schools of thought and different politics that's at play, I think that's also an evolution that's happening where there's now where your college degree was looked at with some respect, clearly. Now there's some skepticism around it and whether or not it actually buys you that same amount of authority that it did at one time. That's happening sort of independently of this process. But this is something else that doesn't feel good. And I wonder if this recalibration of the way we're talking about voters will actually happen because they're not fitting into the stereotypes because it doesn't really work. The boxes, as I said, are kind of all breaking down. So I want to watch that carefully. The inference there is dark. And if there's one thing, again, let's kind of zoom out from these categories. If you look over the story of America, one of the things that Americans do not like, doesn't matter where you live, your color of skin, your faith, anything. It's part of the American culture. We often don't talk about the culture overall because we're so intent on showing what divides us. The culture overall is that elitism doesn't play well here. It was the whole monarchy business that we didn't like. It was part of the American Revolution. It doesn't matter if you're new here, you just came, you're a new American, or you're an American that can trace their family back hundreds of years. There's that feeling of that elitism doesn't play here because this is the land of opportunity. The American dream can be pursued. This is part of what we believe. We don't talk about what we believe collectively enough, but there's that feeling. And this is part of what we're seeing in the media. It's part of one of the reasons why I created Smarter News is that this elitism, it's the way of speaking about the American people while they're in the room in a way that does not feel appropriate, correct, or accurate. And the media keeps doing it. That elite class in the media does it. That elite political class does it. I'm going to tell you what's good for you. When I thought of Smarter News, I thought I want to create the equivalent of what is the best hamburger shop in town. You know the place you can go for a great dinner, maybe a good glass of wine, a little champagne. We're not here to judge. I'm just saying it's a great menu and you love the people. You feel there's a friendliness to the atmosphere. You feel comfortable. That's how news delivery should feel because it's a customer service. That's how the restaurant would stay in business. A restaurant doesn't stay in business when it has a group of waiters that hand you a menu and tell you what's good for you. And that's what the media feels like a lot of the time. It's one of the reasons why I left. But for some reason, they can't hear themselves. And it's because they're all in the same geographic location. They're all in the same social circles and they don't really hear how they sound. And it really took me, I felt it when I was there, but it took me removing myself completely from that environment, moving states, putting myself in a completely different area to realize just how that hits and why it feels like such a betrayal. So, welcome to the hamburger shop. I hope you're happy here. And we want to make sure you're well fed and move you on your way because that's what a good business does. Gets you nourished and then moves you on so that you can live the life that you're meant to live, not to stay in a 24-hour news cycle that you get trapped in. Just a little tangent there, but I think that's important. Let's listen to a little bit of what President Trump had to say last night. And speaking of the media, let me just show you this before I do that. This was the headline in the New York Times. I'm asking the story, have we learned anything from the last, even the last several hours? Is there any sort of reflection in the media? And I could point to this and say, it doesn't look like it, because here's one of the headlines that you see here. And this is the headline from the New York Times. I'm going to pull it up too so I could see it more closely. Getting old, folks. It's just a sign of the times. Next time you see me, I'm going to have really cute cat eyeglasses on. It might be just say they look cute. Okay. Just say they look cute. So my confidence isn't broken. Here's the headline: Pariah felon president-elect, how Trump fought his way back to power. Think about that headline. Think about more than half the country voted for him. And that's the headline. You dummies, pariah, felon, president-elect. You know what I mean? Like, sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but it's just like, it's so blatant. You're like, how do we not see that this is the tone that we're taking? And by the way, he won more voters than the last several times. In 2016, he didn't win the popular vote. He totally did this time. So what are some of the lessons here? So those are the categories, as I mentioned, those are the categories I'm kind of thinking about for the different voters and what happened. I just suggest one more thing, and then I'll play some of that sound for you. So in this essay that I wrote just before election night, I had all sorts of questions about things that I felt were story threads that hadn't been pulled on enough. And I wondered, like, each one, would it tangle or untangle that campaign? And there's one area that I'd like to summarize for you. It was the biggest part that I wrote, and it was about storytelling. And I said here that discipline cuts both ways. Can I read it to you? I don't know if reading always works, so I'll see if it works, and if not, I'll ad-lib a little bit. So here's what I wrote. I said, I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts by a group of staunch Democrats, former Obama officials. This is Pod Save America. Over the last several weeks, they consistently laud the discipline of the Harris campaign in staying on message. A few months ago, as I researched Harris's rise in the prelude to the 2020 election, I learned that while her campaign first appeared as a potentially viable rival to Joe Biden, she quickly faded because her team lacked organization and discipline. I wondered if this would happen to her again. This was a couple months ago, but it hasn't. I'm curious how time factors in here. Would the campaign have struggled if they had to run a longer race than 4 months? If a primary happened, a more traditional one, would the Democrats have coalesced behind her? We'll never know, and I'm not sure it matters at this point. I have listened to enough interviews with Harris to confirm her remarkable consistency. In fact, I can repeat some of her story by memory and almost picture the neighborhood she grew up in, not far from where I grew up in San Francisco. I've heard the stories about what her mother said about working with others, the bikes with banana seats that the kids rode on after school, how neighbors cared for their lawns. But we have missed a piece of her story. We have not heard the story of Kamala Harris in her 20s, 30s, and 40s, the prosecutor, the attorney general, the senator, specific examples of conflicts she confronted and navigated, challenges she faced, and how she evolved to a leader. I wonder why and if this will matter. Discipline can cut both ways. It can insulate you from mistakes, but it can also insulate you from connection. I wonder if the campaign threaded the needle. I wonder if that was a factor here, if it was just the economy. You know, maybe it's not that deep. Let me just read this following paragraph, which is about former President Trump, for balance. On the other end of the spectrum, former President Trump has shown a lack of discipline. I do not need to write more than that phrase for you to understand what I mean by it. He consistently goes off message or off prompter. He remains consistently undisciplined, and that's on brand. Former President Trump has never presented himself as a disciplined candidate. While pundits will argue this will not benefit him in this last sprint to election day, I wonder in this environment if it helps him. Because although unpredictable at times, he has not veered into a foreign version of himself. For better or worse, depending on where you stand, he has shown who he is. And this too can cut both ways, either a huge benefit or a huge detriment. One area that feels like the Trump campaign has missed reflection, equally to Vice President Harris. We have not really heard how former President Trump has grown or evolved, how his leadership style has changed or will change due to his experiences in the White House and after. This feels like a miss. Maybe we're going to get it. Maybe not. The story matters. The simplicity in the story matters. Make America Great Again is a theme that can be easily repeated, and you know what it means, whether you like it or not. The Democrats didn't really have that. And is it as simple as that storytelling that was missing? Here's what President Trump said in the first 2 minutes of his speech, if you missed it.
Well, I want to thank you all very much. This is great. These are our friends. We have thousands of friends in this incredible movement. This was a movement like nobody's ever seen before. And frankly, this was, I believe, the greatest political movement of all time. There's never been anything like this in this country, and maybe beyond. And now it's going to reach a new level of importance because we're going to help our country heal. We're going to help our country heal. We have a country that needs help, and it needs help very badly. We're going to fix our borders. We're going to fix everything about our country. And We made history for a reason tonight, and the reason is going to be just that. We overcame obstacles that nobody thought possible, and it is now clear that we've achieved the most incredible political thing. Look what happened. Is this crazy? But it's a political victory that our country has never seen before, nothing like this. I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th president. And every citizen, I will fight for you, for your family, and your future. Every single day I will be fighting for you, and with every breath in my body, I will not rest until we have delivered the strong, safe, and prosperous America that our children deserve and that you deserve. This will truly be the golden age of America. That's what we have to have. This is a magnificent victory for the American people that will allow us to make America great again.
So those were the first 2 minutes from last night's speech. We just got some breaking news from the Associated Press as we're broadcasting here that Vice President Harris called President-elect Donald Trump Wednesday to congratulate him on his election victory, a senior Harris aide said. Exactly how I was telling you, it's always going to be confirmed by someone that's not on the record per se. Let me just see if President Trump, and he has not put that on X. Oftentimes there's, again, a deference to, okay, we got the call and we're going to let that candidate have, in this case, her moment. And then the page will turn. So let's see if that sort of decorum is followed. That's traditionally what's followed. I was looking at Instagram. Some of you had some really important points. I'm wondering, for those of you who do not support former President Trump, President-elect Trump, that how you feel about his words last night. Do they hit you at all? Do they resonate with you at all? Do you just absolutely not believe him? What are your feelings, your emotions today, hearing somewhat of what he said? Not hearing how the media is describing him, hearing some of what he has said. I'm curious about that. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I do want to also address another comment where, when I mentioned from the New York Times in this piece, where the New York Times described him as a pariah felon president-elect. And one of you said, well, he is a felon. And that is true. He has been convicted in the state of New York. Let's talk a little bit about that. This is a very interesting part of the story. We know that President Trump has faced 4 different cases against him. 2 are federal cases that are being overseen by the special prosecutor, Jack Smith. And then you have 2 separate cases in New York and Georgia that are being overseen by different people, just to keep it simple. And the case in New York, when it came to this particular scenario, I'm just trying to keep it very general. President Trump was convicted on several counts. And let me go ahead and pull them up just so that I have the official accounts. New York case. I don't want to do this from memory because I think it's very important to be accurate. Because there's been criminal cases, there's the federal cases. The case that I'm referring to has often been talked about as the hush money case. You've got to be careful with that. It has to do with essentially having to do with fraud, falsifying business records for these quote unquote hush money payments. There were 34 counts he was convicted of. And so the important thing to know about this is that there wasn't a sentencing. The sentencing was supposed to happen before the election, but something else happened. The Supreme Court had to rule on a case about presidential immunity, something that hasn't really been tackled in the Constitution or by the Supreme Court. Does the president have any immunity to acts that happened while in office? And what does that even look like? What the Supreme Court did here, speaking of threading a needle, said in some cases, the president is protected. And because of that ruling from the Supreme Court, the judge in the New York case said, okay, I'm gonna need a second. Because right away, President Trump's team filed a motion and said, listen, this case has to be thrown out. This indictment has to be thrown out against him, because the case that was built by these lawyers in New York was built upon different evidence that would not be allowed in court due to this new Supreme Court ruling. So it has to be thrown out. This is what they're saying. This is their argument. The judge is taking a look at that and also taking a look at the sentencing. So he is going to have to rule. The judge in the case in New York is going to rule. It's November 6th today. So November 12th is next Tuesday. The judge is going to rule on the motion in New York that the indictment should be thrown out. It doesn't mean that a different indictment couldn't be brought against the president and then retried, but it would basically say, in this particular case, this, and I'm hypothesizing here because I don't know what the judge is going to do, but the argument would be the case against President Trump was built upon evidence that it's not going to be allowed anymore because of the Supreme Court ruling. And we can't go through this case with a fine-tooth comb and remove all these different things. It just has to be retried. So it's going to be thrown out and we're going to have to start over. And it's up to you, prosecutor, if you want to continue to do this and actually file another indictment against him based on some of these new limitations that exist. That's one scenario. The other scenario is the judge could be like, yeah, it doesn't matter. No, we're not throwing out the case. It goes on. And then there would be a sentencing. The sentencing is scheduled for November 26th, which is right before Thanksgiving, by the way. Yeah, 2 days before Thanksgiving. So then we could actually see the sentencing. How this would all work out, y'all, we don't know. I'd love to tell you that I would have a great way of explaining this to you. It would be totally unprecedented. And I know we've all heard that term too much, and I apologize. We should have like a tip jar, like a swear jar for that. We could, because it almost means nothing anymore. But we would just be in just a new territory. I don't even know how to even play out the scenarios from that. So really what you're looking for is next Tuesday and understanding what is the judge going to rule. That's going to determine everything that happens next. And so although he is a convicted felon now, if the case is thrown out, then I guess that title would not apply. For now, yes. But in the future, I don't know. The other case in Georgia, interesting, there's a way that the results from last night actually play in here as well. In Georgia, Fannie Willis, who was the DA for Fulton County, brought this case against President Trump related to election interference in the state of Georgia. The judge is going to rule in the first week of December about whether or not that case is able to go forward. There's been controversy about the DA's relationship with the special prosecutor that was appointed. Apparently they had a romantic relationship, and whether or not that the case can go forward in the way that it has gone over the last, year or so. So there's a big fat question mark about whether or not that case moves forward, at what pace, what does that even look like? And is it continue to be pursued in the event that we're in now, that former President Trump is now president-elect? For the two special prosecutor federal cases, this is under the Justice Department, under the Biden administration. This would likely not continue under the Trump administration, although let's see how this all kind of shakes out. I don't see a scenario where that would take place, but I also have not seen a lot of scenarios that have come up in the last several years. So I'm going to leave us all a little space for that. But it is a likely scenario. We could see some of these cases pursued, any of these cases pursued. It's also a likely scenario that come 2025, none of the cases are pursued and they go away. A lot of time and energy, right? And money. So we'll see. Any final questions before we wrap up here at this very time in our broadcast? I feel like there was probably some questions from you that I'd like to make sure that we get to before we leave. One question from Instagram was, remind me how many swing states there were again, and how many did President Trump flip? And I want to go ahead and pull that as well if I can. Let's go ahead and see. Well, you know what? I'd like to go back to I was pulling up a C-SPAN map, but let me go ahead and actually share the screen with the New York Times. Although I may disagree with some of their headlines, their map is pretty good. And it gives us an idea of where things stand right now. So let me go ahead and refresh this. And so we can see it together. So the swing states that we're looking at, again, I know I've heard them a lot, but it's easier to see in a map. Georgia, North Carolina is solidly red, but that doesn't mean it's not a swing state. So it was Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Arizona. These are the traditional swing states. So 2, 4, 6, 7 in total. Right now, according to the results that we have, President-elect Trump has won 5 of them and maybe on his way to winning 6 or 7. And that's what makes this particularly unusual, Charlotte. You asked a question, I believe, is that if we see a run at the table where he takes all the swing states, that was definitely not predicted. And that again would maybe lead to some different conclusions by those in, political circles about what the takeaways are that we talked about. Another question, do you feel that this election will have a lasting effect on mainstream media shifting away from tone deaf coverage? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think the media is quick to congratulate themselves and not quick to self-reflect. So I think in general, these different broadcast networks are going to see a really big audience and think to themselves, oh, we did a great job. But I don't know if that's really the takeaway here. And I wonder in the months that follow, if this plays out in the way that we expect it to, and President-elect Trump is in office, even situations that we've traditionally relied upon. For example, the White House press corps has been the major broadcast networks. President Trump hasn't had a specific beef with the Associated Press that I know of. So like the Associated Press is usually the lead person that asks the question in the White House briefings. That's sort of a deference to how long the Associated Press has been around and respect for them in the industry. Could we see a total change in the White House press corps, how press is approved or managed by the White House? I have no idea. I'm curious about that. Sam, a question is Kamala's political career over? I don't know. I don't know if it's over. I think one of the things that we've seen is that politicians have many lives when it comes to the media. How many media personalities were former politicians or, had former roles in the White House that then get more lucrative contracts as commentators? So is her political career over? Maybe. If she wants to serve again, she could. If she'd like to continue to stay in Democrat circles for the Democratic Party, could she be tapped in the future for another role in the White House? I think one of the questions, Sam, is this: do people attach her defeat to something she did, or is it something that President-elect Trump did? Right now, that's actually a really important point. Even when you see kind of, again, I've scrolled through a lot of different media, watched a lot of different interviews. Democrats are not being overly critical of her. They're not saying, wow, she ran a really bad campaign and man, she was just too disciplined. She didn't talk about enough about herself. There's none of that right now. It doesn't mean that the wolves don't come out later on. That also is something that I've seen. But for right now, it doesn't appear that way, that there is some big criticism of the campaign. It seems to be an overwhelming, they did what they could in a short period of time in a very unusual situation. She worked extremely hard. She was extremely disciplined and she did very well. If that's the case, then she's not going to be looked at as some sort of pariah to the party. She may actually be looked at as someone that can help turn the party. The question is, will voters fall in line with that? Or could she take a role that's less about an elected position and more in like a leadership role with the Democratic Party? So I wonder about that. That's an interesting question. Kate's asking a question, where did the demographics come from? From exit polls? If so, everywhere supposedly had them. Yes. So a lot of these, Kate, it's interesting. It is a cornucopia of different data sets that people are pulling together. In a state like Nevada, for example, political watchers are looking at the census and they're having an idea of like how many men and women are in this area. What are their different races? What are their different ages? And they're using that. They're comparing it to voter rolls. One of the things I'd like to do a little bit more research on, and I should have done it earlier and apologize, is about how public our data is for like, on voter rolls. For example, I'm getting a bunch of texts from different political campaigns and I'm not in a swing state. So I can't imagine what it's like for you in a swing state. So who has access to that information? How do they buy it? Or how do they procure it? What's actually public? Just the voter rolls are public, from what my understanding is. But the additional data sets and how they get granular, I don't have a great understanding of that. There's another great question on YouTube from Lindsay. What can we expect between now and the next scoop? Any more lives? Did you guys like more lives? I was thinking about doing a live tomorrow. One of my really good friends, Mary Catherine Ham, is hilarious and brilliant. And she's joined us a few different times to talk about the female vote because she's a female. But she's been a political watcher for a long time. We've been exchanging a bunch of texts and different reporting. Mary Catherine's more of a political commentator. She shares her opinion, and she'll sit on different panels. And she often has a voice that's more independent / libertarian than aligned with the political party. She's not introduced as a Republican or a Democrat, but she would probably fall more in that category of libertarian or conservative, which might be even more of the reason to speak to her about the female vote. That's not being really mentioned as much, but definitely broke more for President-elect Trump. So we were talking about having coffee together and doing that as a live. Would you guys like that? I think it'd be interesting to talk to someone whose whole job is to watch the results and then make deductions from it. And she has a very interesting skill set, and she's funny. So it's not like hanging out with, someone that's not funny, which we don't want to do. Would you guys like that? We can maybe do it around noon tomorrow if it works for you, maybe a little bit earlier than that. And we can have coffee together and maybe work through, because I think it'll be interesting to see what does Vice President Harris say. Do we hear again from President-elect Trump? Or does everyone sort of quiet down? Does everyone just take it easy? And we can catch our breath. Maybe that's wishful thinking, but that's what I'm going to be watching right now for the next several hours. And then I think we should do that live tomorrow morning. So I'll figure out that time and make sure to post it on social media. And if you are a Scoop subscriber, I'll make sure to send that out to you so you could join us. I think it'll be really fun. And I think we could use some, excitement. So coffee and a chat. I love that. Lola says coffee and a chat. Okay. Coffee and a chat. We're going to do that. Tracy's asking me to do some live long form interviews. So actually that kind of leads us into our last point. And I wanted to just share this one video. A friend of mine shared it with me. And it came some insight from an unexpected place. Do you guys know Charlemagne on the Breakfast Club? It's a huge radio show in the Northeast. He's got a very big platform. He did a town hall with Vice President Harris, but he's known as not being an easy interviewer, not necessarily being a journalist, like 60 Minutes journalist. He's a radio host, but being a tough interview at times and not falling strictly on party lines, asking some really pointed questions. He had some reflections about the results of the race that I wanted to share with you, because I think it's just important to listen to, radio hosts that are in touch with the people who listen to them, as it is a political analyst that's on CNN. Respect to all of them. I want to share this with you. And then I have a final thought that I'd like to talk to you about, which plays into whether or not Smart News should do some longer form interviews. So here's a little bit from Charlemagne.
America has spoken, and they spoke loud and clear. Donald Trump will be the 47th president of the United States of America. I have friends on the right. I have friends on the left. I have friends that are independents. And regardless of who we all decided to vote for yesterday, guess what? Donald Trump is now all of our president again. I don't want to fight anyone. I don't want to argue with anyone, because at the end of the day, we are all Americans and we all want what's best for this country. I hope. Okay, I know today Democrats are going to be looking for someone to blame. Let me be the first to tell you it's not just one thing. I personally feel like Donald Trump speaks to people's grievances better than Democrats do. I know people are going to talk about misinformation and the dumbing down of society. I understand all of that, but you don't have to be intelligent to know you can't pay your bills. You don't have to be intelligent to know you can't afford groceries. People will forget what you did. They will forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And to millions of Americans, tens of millions of Americans, they simply felt financially better when Trump was in office. I don't think it's fair to just chalk up, Trump winning to racism, sexism, homophobia, anti-Semitism. Yes, he tapped into all of the worst things America has ever had to offer. And there are a lot of people who agree with his rhetoric and voted for him because of those reasons. But I truly believe most people voted for him because they want more money in their pocket and they want to feel safe. Look, I know the economy does better under Democrat presidents, but Democrats haven't been able to make the American people believe that. I know the border is a bipartisan issue, but Democrats spent a lot of time acting like it wasn't an issue. Democrats created the sanctuary cities. Democrats told them to come on in. Meanwhile, Republicans were putting migrants on buses and planes and sending them to those sanctuary cities, and then Democrats had to change course. But it might have been too little too late, because at the end of the day, once again, when you see all that money going to migrants, going to the border issue, all you can think to yourself is they have billions for that, but aren't making investments into the communities right here in America. You see homeless people everywhere. You don't have no money in your pocket. You don't know how you're going to pay your bills. You face an eviction. Listen, I'm not saying Trump is going to fix all of that. All I'm saying is Donald Trump has made people feel like he will fix all that in a way that Democrats have it. Once again, don't just chalk it up to racism, sexism. Okay, I believe those things play a role, but at the end of the day, it's the economy, stupid. And Democrats.
What do you think about that? What do you think about those comments from Charlemagne? What are your thoughts on that? So again, looking at if we're going to kind of get all this different feedback from all sorts of places, let's do it the right way. And let's bring in all these different threads and make sure that we're getting a complete picture. I thought that was interesting off the bat this morning with some observations about what does this actually mean. So we'll have more of that. By the way, I'll make sure to post that whole clip along with some links to some of these longer sound bites in our show notes in the podcast section, as well as in the YouTube notes. So you can go back and listen to the full thing. Charlemagne goes on for another about 2 minutes, and it's worth a listen. It's worth a listen because it wouldn't necessarily be the expected analysis. And that's what we always have to bring in the unexpected. I think he'd be a great interview, by the way. I think he'd be a really good interview. Speaking of longer term interviews and your thoughts on this, I'd like to do an exercise just real quick. It's going to take 30 seconds, but I think it's really important. At this point right now, finish this sentence. My dream for America is. I'm not trying to be cheesy. I'm not trying to be corny. I'm trying to make us all think about what is the story that we want to tell. All these people work for you. Every single one of them. They didn't win some sort of contest. They got hired for a job. They are your new employees. Don't get it twisted. And in order for them to succeed, we are going to have to chart a course for them, a list of expectations. All of them, Democrat and Republican, White House, Senate, House of Republicans. One of the things we haven't done a good job of, and I'm as guilty of it as others, and we're going to make a change right here on Smarter News. Finish this sentence. My dream for America is. We have to start doing this reporting and highlighting what the American people truly want to put the people back in the position of power, because that is what America's about. We don't fear the people. The people are the source of power in our country. It doesn't come from the government. That's the whole point of the U.S. Constitution. We have some structure. We need that. It's important. There's a job to be done. But we don't fear the people. We empower the people. And one of the ways we do that is through a free and functioning nonpartisan press. So let's go. My dream for America is, let's start this as part of our reporting here at Smarter News. I'd love to share some of your responses, your thoughts. Let's start speaking that out and reporting it and highlighting it. I love highlighting all these different experts. They're fascinating, but so are you. And I'd like to hear more from you. And I think that's one of my big takeaways from this election period is when I've asked you a question, the insights that you have provided are better than any pollster, analyst, or expert. And that's the truth. That's just the fact. So my dream for America is, finish that sentence, keep the comments coming, and let's see what story you come up with. I'm so glad to spend this time together. I'll be watching for Vice President Harris to step to the microphone. We'll make sure to bring you that speech in its entirety and maybe cut a few different sound bites if possible for social media. But sometimes I think it's better just to see the whole thing, beginning to end. Primary sources matter. So we'll watch for that. We'll also be highlighting what President-elect Trump says, and we're on to the next chapter. So look forward to spending some more time with you this week, and always love and appreciate your support so much. Smarter News would not be possible without you. We're building a solution in news, quick, concise, nonpartisan news. SmarterNews.com is a great home base for you if you're ever curious about what's going on. If you miss us on social media, or you're not into social media, or you need a break. And we have a variety of different ways that we can connect. So head there, and I look forward to spending some more time together. But thank you for building the stream, and thank you for your continued support of a free press. Have a great day, guys. I'll talk to you later. Bye.